Hello, and welcome to the Carol Troxell Reader, Cara Black, and 3 Hours in Paris, a program in the all-virtual 2021 Virginia Festival of the Book. I'm Jane Kulo, Director of the Virginia Center for the Book, a program of Virginia Humanities. Thanks for joining us. A couple of notes before I hand the program over to our speakers. Please share your questions using the Q&A tab on Zoom. This event has optional closed captioning, which you can turn on and customize using the closed captions tab at the bottom of your window. If you haven't already read today's book, we hope you will. For details about how to buy it from our bookseller for this event, New Dominion Bookshop, visit vabook.org, where you can also explore our full schedule and watch past events. While you're there, please consider making a donation to support the festival's ongoing work at vabook.org/give. We have special thanks to our sponsor, the Carol Troxell Fund, and its many donors, with additional thanks to our partner, New Dominion Bookshop. This event is one in an annual series honoring Carol Troxell, the 30-year owner of New Dominion Bookshop, and recognizing her literary leadership in our community. Now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. Cara Black, author of 3 Hours in Paris, is also the author of 19 books in the New York Times bestselling Aimée LeDuc series. She has received multiple nominations for the Anthony and Macavity Awards, and her books have been translated into German, Norwegian, Japanese, French, Spanish, Italian, and Hebrew. Cara lives in San Francisco. Our moderator, Ellen Crosby, is the author of the Virginia Wine Country Mystery Series. Her newest book, and 11th in the series, The French Paradox, is just published here and in the UK. Ellen's books have been nominated for the Mary Higgins Clark Award and the Library of Virginia Fiction and People's Choice Awards. Ellen lives in Northern Virginia. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Ellen and Cara, and it's all yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Cara. How are you?
Bonjour. Bonjour, Ellen.
Bonjour et bienvenue au Festival du Livre de Virginie. So welcome to the Virginia Book Festival. It's been a while since we saw each other. I think it was the last time I was in California on your coast. So you have
That's
been.
right.
Yes.
You were looking up vineyards or something. If
I might have been. I might have been doing a book event or something, but yes, I'm still writing about them. So it's great to see you. And I love that book. I just loved it. I think, one of the things we talked about when we were emailing back and forth is that my husband is French and his uncle was a member of the Resistance. And my mother-in-law was later a translator at the Nuremberg trials because Andre was born in Paris and his family grew up there. So reading this was it was fascinating. And for anybody, and we have quite a crowd listening today or participating with us today, it's a great book. So if you haven't read it, get it. So I've got so many questions. I want to get started. My first one is that I read somewhere that you said you spent 20 years researching the book. You were just picking up threads of information as you went along. So my question for you is, did you know you wanted to write a book about World War II or this book? And where was the trigger? When did you find the little nugget of information that led you to Kate?
Oh, thank you. Great.
And also, you should tell a little bit about the plot. I'm assuming everybody's read it, but discuss the plot a little and then tell us about the research.
Sure. Well, there's an American woman who is a trained markswoman. She grew up in rural Oregon, learning to shoot when she was little, living on a ranch during the Depression. And she has gone to Paris on a scholarship with the Alliance Française and studied French at the Sorbonne in the summer of 1937, when everyone thought peace was possible. And what happens next is she falls in love with a Welshman, goes to the UK, the war starts, they have a baby. He's an engineer up in the Orkney Islands. And I don't want to say too much, but tragedy happens based on real events. And she is recruited by the British Secret Service, which had different names at the time. It was before the SOE, which maybe a lot of readers are familiar with if they read World War II fiction. It's Section D, which existed. And she goes over 2 weeks into the German occupation of Paris, 2 weeks, to assassinate the Fuhrer.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, she doesn't assassinate him. But and the rest of the book is how does she get out of it and what happens. So
right.
Yeah.
It was breathtaking. I mean, you can't put it down. I mean, you know what happens, but you still have to, you still can't put it down. So talk about the research.
Sure. Well, over the 20 years I've been going to Paris and staying on my friend's couch, I've collected many, many, many of these little notebooks.
Oh,
Okay.
I love that.
Right? The ones with the grid. I mean, I have so many.
Yeah, the French, always the grid. Yep, I have those too.
I have many, many, many. So when I go to Paris and I'm doing research for Aimée LeDuc, I have maybe I color code them. This one is the blue one. Then I may be on a bus and I hear some words, some phrase. I write that's like language in one book, some odd tidbit, historical bit, and so they all go in. And so many of these little notebooks, would be having the details of the arrondissements, but many of them were things that I heard that did not belong in Aimée LeDuc book. Amazing, wonderful jewels. And so there were all these notebooks filling up. And I think, because my father was such a big reader and he read books all the time. When I grew up in our home library, there were all these dog-eared books of a John le Carré or a Ken Follett or Len Dayton, original, And here, I think I was like 12 years old and I was reading all these books.
Yeah.
And rereading them, I have so much I didn't understand, but I love that. It was like wartime and or Cold War, or there was this espionage, and we were doing these incredible things. And of course, people in my family served in World War II, so there were stories. As you had different stories, but so there was this backdrop, and I always wondered, well, why wasn't a woman doing some of these things? Just kind of that would be, why not? Sure. What did the women do during the war? I mean, they didn't just have take care of the babies and cook cassoulet, they did a lot more things. So that's sort of where it came from. So the nugget, so again, I'm very interested in World War II. And when I started going to France, my friends would talk about their great-grandfathers serving in the trenches in World War I, because that was their background. And I started hearing, but in World War II, my uncle, my father's brother, he was doing this and he was doing that, just these incredible things. And I realized that that Hitler came to Paris once for 3 hours.
That is so interesting.
Why? Why did this man come for 3 hours? And he came, I have show and tell because I was a preschool teacher. Okay. So here is Hitler on the trip with Albert Speer, the architect over here, the architect, armaments guy, Arno Brecker, the sculptor, okay, the artist, okay.
Right.
And Brecker had lived in France and thought he was going to be showing the Fuhrer Paris, but no, Hitler knew what he was doing. Here they are. Wow. And he went where he wanted to. Years afterward, and that was it. There was no more. And Paris, at the time of their visit, and I bought this at a flea market. Okay, wow. Look at the Champs-Élysées with the policeman, and on the back it says 1940.
Wow.
Okay, so this is what it looked like.
Wow.
Right into the occupation. Now I wondered, why didn't Hitler have a big parade down the Champs-Élysées?
Yeah.
It's his city, right? It's his. And then I was reading a lot about these men, and quickly Albert Speer was in prison, later wrote about his time in the Reich. And he said that this visit with these two men happened June 28th, 1940. Arno Brecker wrote in his story after the war, it happened June 23rd, 1940, because that would have made a lot more sense because the armistice had just been signed in northern France. So why did these two men who were with him, write these two different events? And I just became obsessed with that. Something happened. There's something going on. And, you know, history is written by the victors. So,
Yeah.
you know, and what if there was a history altering event that was hushed up, you know, and I became obsessed. And I started talking with my editor, and she, it's a whole press, Julia Krenz. And I had said always I had these things. And sometimes she would say to me, this is great. It doesn't belong in an Aimée book. Keep it for something later.
Right.
And so then when I told her about this, she said, why don't you just write it? Just write it. Get going.
I wanted to ask you about that too, because the book is very structured. I mean, every chapter is the timeline, because the Führer has given, you know, he wants answers in 24 hours, right? And so there's a ticking clock. So it's a very logical way for you to structure your chapters. Okay, so in Mysteryland, there are two kinds of writers. There are people who write by the seat of their pants, called pantsers, and there are people who write with outlines, planners. I'm a planner. I read, to my great surprise, one time that you said you're a pantser. You write by the seat of your pants. How did you write this book if you're a pantser? I mean, I read somewhere that you had a map of Germany on the wall, but I would have had note cards and a timeline. What did you do?
Well, I am a pantser, or by the seat of my hem, or whatever.
Yes, right.
But look at this. I found this. This is a Paris plan, you know, a German
right.
For occupying troops. This is what Paris looks like, because they would go to Paris for R&R.
Right.
And I found one of these somewhere. And I went, oh my God, this is what it was like. So when I started out with the idea, I wrote a lot of the book, and then I realized I needed a new beginning, a different beginning, and I wrote that. But
you know, the part about Wales, or
yes, Scotland, yeah, up in the Orkney Islands. Yeah, it had originally been set in Wales, because Rafe was Welsh, but it didn't work because he, you know, there was no bombing. So
right.
And my editor and I talked about it. We needed real-time events, because these things in the book happened. Based on real events, which I fictionalized. So there was this bombing in the Orkney Islands at Scapa Flow. It's true, a submarine got through. So I did that, but I sort of wrote the story, and then I printed it out, and I put it on the floor, and I made a long column, you know, point of view, each Gunter, page, whatever. And then I realized, no, Gunter wouldn't do this because he wasn't there. He was here. And then I would shuffle it. And, you know, so when I got the idea for the timeline, because one of my favorite ever books is The Day of the Jackal.
Yes.
And the film, which I reread every year. But by Day of the Jackal, we know de Gaulle lives, okay?
Right.
But it's the suspense, and how was that built up? And there was a timeline, right?
Yeah.
Because the Jackal, the hired assassin, we realize has planned, you know, at this moment in front of Montparnasse station is when he will shoot de Gaulle, which would have worked.
Right.
So if you're working against a timeline, that really helped. And I realized I needed to work within the framework of blackouts, a curfew, because curfew changed a lot. And I had to do a lot of really nerdy research to try and find out what time the curfew was in June 1940, because it was different in September. Huh?
Yeah, it shows in your book that you've done that kind of nerdy research. You also said that you have a friend who is a résistant, who, when you go to Paris now, he's 90, takes you around. And I'm especially interested in that because André's uncle never spoke about what he did. He just didn't. So has he told you stories, or how is it when you go around Paris with him? What is he like? Does he drive like a madman, like all Parisians do when you drive around Paris?
It's crazy. He's a really bad driver, and he's
90. All bad drivers. Right. You always hang on to the Jesus strap, you know? Yeah. So tell us about him.
Yeah. Well, also, and his eyesight's getting bad. So
he's 90. Yeah.
Well, he was very young. He was of Polish origin. His parents were political exiles, very radical. His father hid during the war and then was taken to Natzov's Strutweiler camp, beheaded, just horrible things. His mother survived and ran a camp. And Eli Wiesel, if I'm saying it right, stayed there as a young man who came, or young boy, teenager came from the camps, for young Jewish orphans, to help them get on their feet and then emigrate. So they were very proactive political people. But Tali he was like 11 when he grew up in the Marais, when the Marais was a shtetl, it was a ghetto, it was run down, it's where poor people lived.
Right.
We've gone over on many, he'll drive me around, said this is where the ladies of the night worked, which is now very shishi, and they would give us candies, and he remembered standing in the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Antoine in the Marais when the Germans marched into Paris coming from the Bastille, and he remembered the German soldiers would buy fruit and veg from the carts that were on the street, and a German soldier paid when they, at first, bought a banana and gave him a banana. He'd never eaten a banana.
Wow.
Anyway, so, his father was killed by the Germans, but I mean, he's just these incredible things, which I know you have stories as well, but so he, his mother sent him to the countryside. He came back 1944, he started, so he was 14 or 15 and started, handing out subversive papers and hiding. And so his
Did he stay in Paris? Was he in Paris the whole time?
No, his mother sent him to the countryside.
But but when he was in the Resistance, was he in Paris or?
Yes, when he came back when he was about 14 in 1944, just at the end there, he joined the Resistance. He had a person who ran him. I mean, they used the young kids for different kinds of things, right? But he ran, he took objects, he took tracts, he did things like that. But that was towards the end of the war. But I mean, he was very much a resistant. He ran away from his shelter in the countryside to try and find his mother in Paris and work with the resistance.
Right. Well, because I think Andre's uncle wasn't in the city, and he left, and he never talked about what he did. But whenever he came back to Paris, he always brought a sack of potatoes. And my mother-in-law said to this day, when she passed away many years ago, but she said she couldn't even look at a potato after the war. She just couldn't, but that was a real luxury, and that was a treat that he brought them. So wow.
My friend's mother also, I've gone to the market with her and found one of those topinambours, which are like a rutabaga, some kind of awful fruit. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I saw this thing, this is the new vegetable. It's so courant, we can make an emulsion with it. And she goes, no, I ate those all during the war. I will never eat another one.
Yeah. Well, another thing I wanted to ask you, your French must be absolutely flawless. You must be like native speaking to be able to conduct the interviews you do. And did you learn French in school?
I learned French in a Catholic school from nuns.
Right.
So it's old-fashioned French.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask, so you've been going there for 20 years. We lived on the French-Swiss border, and in the 1980s, France was a country that I would say would be sort of it's chauvinistic, honestly. It's like machismo, and so a woman wasn't always taken as seriously as a man, and I think had trouble making inroads into certain careers or professions or whatever. So here you are, starting say 20 years ago, an American woman going over and trying to ask questions of the flics, of the police, of interviewing all kinds of people. How did that work? Did you have trouble? How did it evolve over the years? And now you say you take them all out for drinks and catch up and chat and everything. How did that evolve? And talk a little bit about that process.
Very slowly.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah. Well, so I had lived in Europe previously, but when I went in the 80s to visit my friends, Sarah, whose mother was actually a hidden Jewish child during the war in the Marais. When I went back to stay with Sarah and see her, and she told me the story, Sarah was, kind of like, then I met her mother, and then I started to think about writing the story. So over the years, I would say, well, what was that like? Mm-hmm. And so she'd introduce me to her dentist brother-in-law, whose father had like had
Oh,
an
wow.
experience. So
Mhm.
it's that, you know how it is with French
Yeah.
people. It's intro, intro, intro.
Yeah.
And you're an American. I was not published at the time, so it was
Yeah.
very different. I mean, I'm just
I know.
nosy.
And they say, who are you with? You say, I'm with me. I mean, that's, you don't, yeah, that's
I was
tough.
not a journalist, so it was very informal, and I would just be incredible. And the wide-eyed kind of naive American, they love, people tell you stories. I mean, that's been my biggest cachet. I just open my mouth and go, really? And they love to talk about
Oh,
this.
that's fascinating. Yeah.
So I am naive. And so people would tell me things. And then of course there would be like, when you try and get specifics, they might go, why? Then when I got published, it was easier. And there's actually a wonderful writer, Paula Woods in LA, who frequently reviews for the LA Times. And she was saying, Cara, I want to set an art mystery in Paris. Who are your contacts with the fleets? And I was so embarrassed because I didn't have any. And she goes, well, do you call the press office? Do you whatever? And I go, yeah. So I did what Paula suggested. And I went I made an appointment. They got to see me. And then actually by that time I had written a book and they were like, oh, okay. They took me out to lunch. They told me all the charts of the organization and 36 cases. And then it went on. And I met someone. And then later, when I was writing another, I wanted to know about, I don't know, art theft or something. So he goes, well, here, you call this guy and tell him, I knew him in the academy, or I know that his team works on this. And it's always been like that. I get one person in the police and he'll go, I don't even do that anymore now. And now he doesn't. He's in a very secret hush hush thing that I can't write about. But he says, no, you talk to this guy, and it's always been like that. And they're also kind of like, who's this woman? They've taken me to shooting ranges,
Right.
And I was wearing flip-flops. Not a good thing to do at a shooting.
No, it isn't. It isn't. Well, listen, before we get too much farther, would you read a little bit for us, and then we can maybe talk about what you're going to read, and then if there's any questions, we can take those too. I think so far I don't see any, and I think it's because you're so riveting. Everybody's just engrossed in what you have to say. So let's do that. I have mine on my Kindle, but it's the same place that you told me.
So Ellen asked me, what I would like to read. And so this is just a very short section, a few paragraphs that my editor loves and I love too. And I think I don't have, sorry, hair's in my face. I don't think I need to set it up too much, except that Kate has been recruited by the British and her handler is called Stepney. And so Stepney is taken to this old country house. She doesn't know where she is. Stepney cleared his throat to get her attention. We have limited time, Mrs. Rees. That's Kate's name, Kate Rees. Please listen closely and try to remember everything I say. If nothing else, remember these letters, R-A-D-A. He gave her a half smile. No, it's not the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, but that will help you remember. Burn the letters in your brain. Make them second nature. RADA, read, assess, decide, act. This stands for read the situation, assess possible outcomes, decide on options, act on your decision. Can you repeat that? She did. You'll have practice examples later. Think those letters, RADA, to yourself constantly, every moment of every hour, wherever you are. Walking on the street, in the shop, boarding the metro. Any moment, a German soldier might stop and demand your papers. It's impossible to avoid them. So you need to be prepared. Always have a story ready, but be flexible. According to the situation, use your intuition, your instinct. Kate shifted in the hardback chair. So you're sending me behind enemy lines? That depends on how well you do in training, he said, but I believe you're more than capable based on what I've seen. You've got what you Americans call moxie, Mrs. Rees. In Oregon, we call it hellfire.
That was great. That was great. One of the things that struck me in that book is that's what keeps her alive. I mean, so where did that come from? Did somebody teach you about that, talk to you about that? It was very interesting, the training that he gave her and how it's carried through the book. So talk a little bit about that.
The training,
Yeah. And how you did it. I mean, you know, there are these impossible situations, but she just falls back on that, and she's just, you know, she does this with her wits, and she gets through these nearly impossible situations by improvising. And then you had that makeup artist, such who helped her. So talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, Kate, the character of Kate Reese, it came from, I wanted to write about an American woman, and why would she be involved in this so early in the war? What would make a woman do this kind of, you know, take on this almost suicide mission?
Yeah.
And for reasons we won't say, but there's reasons she does that. And who would she be? And originally I thought, well, let's see, she grew up during the Depression, age-wise.
Right.
And then I thought, oh, she'd be a gal from the Wild West. She'd be from Montana. Well, I did book tours as you do. And I was in Oregon, which is, I go often. And I was talking to my friend, oh, she's going to be from Montana. And, you know, and she goes, why? And I go, well, you know, she goes, have you been to Montana? And I go, no. She goes, well, you're in Oregon right now. And, you know, we have those kind of women here. We have descendants in Oregon who came over, you know, the mountains and covered wagons, who, you know, those people are still there, and descendants, of course. And, you know, those kind of, and she worked for the Historical Society and had taped, you know, the women, you know, a long time ago as well, who during the Depression talked about running a ranch or farming or, you know, herding cattle. And it's not easy now. And it just, can you imagine, you know, during the Depression.
Right.
And I heard these stories of these women, and their ancestors were people who'd come over on covered wagons. You know, these are tough people who came, you know, maybe they had nothing to lose. Right. And so there was, you know, these stories about women who had been young girls growing up on a ranch, and the cattle got out of the gate or the field, and it was snowing, and you had to capture the cattle, otherwise you were up the creek, and you also had to get them back in a snowstorm. You had to mend the fence so they couldn't get out again, and you know, there was no time to, I don't have a code or something. You just did it, and you had to think on your feet. So, and Kate had 5 brothers. So if you have 5 brothers, right, you can, that through a lot, and grew up, and her father was a migrant ranch foreman, which a friend of mine, her great grandfather was a migrant ranch foreman during the Depression. And that was, I mean, it's tough anyway, but he had to move, you know, according to season, according to animal migration. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's super tough, but it was a hard life. Even in those days, until I believe the 40s, 50s, wolves were, you could bounty hunt wolves. Northern California, Southern Oregon, because they were a menace to the herds, get $25.
That's where she learned.
And that's a lot of money at that time, $25. Yeah. So she learned to shoot, excuse me, growing up, you know, on the ranch, because it was for game food and to protect the herd. So that's the kind of
shoot like that. Do you know how to shoot like that? Did you know how to shoot like that? Did you?
My shooting is terrible. I've gone to the gun range with the French cops, and I'm a menace. So,
which always makes everybody, it's like the safety's on the wrong side. We have a question. I'm going to say, this is someone who's reading the book now, and she said, did you find the French willing to talk about the milice and French collaboration with the Nazis during the war? Separately, when did the French begin to post the affiche around Paris, in the Marais, for example, where people had been killed? So did they talk about the collaborationists?
For this story? Well, see, this story is very different. I mean, this story, it's different from my Aimée LeDuc books because she's half French. I really had a freedom here to write as an American woman. Right. And what I also want to say about Kate is that Kate is a big boned woman. Okay. She's not petite French. And so and she's going to be viewing things from an outsider viewpoint, but having been in Paris. So that gave me more freedom. A lot, again, in this part is very little documented in the first 2 weeks, which is really great. Section D, I know a lot about that from the papers, 15% of the papers that survived.
Right.
You know, it depends what side of the fence you were on, if you were a collaborator or not, or, you know, if you were a collaborator and then became a 23rd hour resistant. You know, people tell you what they want to. I've spoken to other resistants. I've spoken to many people. So, you know, I can't judge. I don't know who and what they were at the time. And like you, some people in the family will never talk about it.
Yeah, yeah.
And some people will. Naftali talks a lot. He was a younger man too, you know, young. And so it really depends. Sometimes people, I've met quite a few people who tell me, and they've been in the Jewish resistance or they've been communists, excuse me, communist resistant, and they have suffered so much problem after the war being communists. They were still, you know, like this. So, and they lost their power. So a lot of times I've met people and they go, you know, I'll talk about this for a while. And then the rest you have to go to the Shoah. And I gave my history there. So it just depends.
One of the things that I found out when, you know, when I lived in London and I lived in Moscow in the 80s and the 90s, and then France, we just lived in a little village next to Geneva. But the celebrations marking the end of the war were a very, very big deal. I mean, my husband is a journalist, and I mean, in London, he heard Vera Lynn sing, you know, and I mean, they brought her back, and it was wonderful. You know, the White Cliffs of Dover and We'll Meet Again and everything. And the Russians, the Soviets, when I was there, it was the Soviet Union, they really never forgot. So do you find that over the course of the years that you've been there, it's now another generation, it's, you know, it's like my kids are adults now, and then, you know, we've got grandchildren and stuff. Is it as, because the last time I lived there was in 98. We moved back in 98, and that's already over 20 years. Has it diminished somewhat with the passing of time, do you think? That fierce, you know, like this is never going to happen again, memory of the war for the, you know, the Allied side?
Well, it's definitely changed in 20 years. You know, what people will talk about and what people won't. Again, when I started 20 years ago in the mid 90s, people would rarely talk about it. Of course, my friend Sarah's mother talked to me about it because it had happened to her. I was doing a talk at the bookstore right down from Place de l'Opera. I don't think it's there anymore, Dalton's. And it was July 9th, and she told me that she had to leave because this was the hour that her parents were rounded up for the Veldiv, you know. And it was so moving. You know, and that was before people are now talking about it. But Ellen, I put it all down to that whatever happened during the war, de Gaulle took the country, and we've got to move on. We've got to build up. You know, we've got to get people planting again. There was rationing 10 years after the war, as in London. So people didn't have things or food or butter or anything. So it was like, move on, put it aside, the people coming back from the camps, let's just soldier on, the myth of the resistance and da da da. 1995, Jacques Chirac made a speech, and he talked about you know, how France had collaborated, you know, France was Vichy. And that was huge. I don't know, that was in Le Figaro. It was like the crack in the wall of silence.
Right.
For whatever reason. And from 95, everyone has been talking about, now, you know, Macron talks about it, they do this, they do that. But someone needed to do that. And the generation, of course, is leaving us. So maybe now they didn't want to talk about it, but now if they don't or write it, then it's gone. So younger people, I think, are taking up the mantle because maybe their great grandparents are finally talking. So there has been a change, and it's time, and it's generation.
And when I think I told you this, when we lived in France, or in Geneva, French-Swiss border in the 80s, Andre covered the trial of Klaus Barbie, who was the butcher of Lyon. And he had this unbelievable defense lawyer, and Andre said that he was sitting next to a journalist from a Jewish newspaper. And when and talking about the collaborations, he said Vergès ended up putting France on trial and the collaborationists on trial, and spoke for 6 hours. And when he was done, Andre said that this Jewish journalist turned to him and said, one could almost believe that Barbie was innocent after listening to him.
Yes, Yes, that guy was amazing.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
he was such an oddball. too.
yeah. So we have another question. Did you write extensive backstories of Kate? It sounds like you did, but tell us about that. I mean, you know so much about her.
Well, of course, little by little, first, of course, I thought she was from Montana, and it wasn't coming because, of course, I hadn't been to Montana. But
Right.
but when I was in Oregon, and I started to go and listen to some of these historical recountings and go to some of these places, I was like, yes, what would it have been like? So I didn't do big biography of Kate, but I knew. I knew Kate. I knew Kate had a tough life, and only a woman who's faced something like this could even attempt to face something, and of course, having nothing to live for, not being able to go back to the United States because of the boats and everything, and losing her family. What is she going to do? Her brothers have joined up. Or no, they joined up later, but what is she going to do? She's going to do the best she can. So it had to be that kind of woman, a woman who, and she sort of came to me as I wrote her. And Ellen, writing as we do, you've got to throw rocks at them, and make it harder and harder.
Yeah.
Briefly, you talked about the makeup artist, and
yes, I wanted to come back to that.
Well, Kate, here she is, a large-boned woman, and she's not petite French. How are you going to put this sort of ungainly ranch gal on the streets of Paris? Occupied with, how are you gonna, come on, is she set up to fail or what? Of course, we read the book, but so what could you do? Now, I read about Shakespearean actors, and then I read about how did the British Secret Service get people to train agents. They went to the jails and they opened up and they found, pickpockets, people who could crack, lock picks, people who scaled, and they just took out these people and said, you help us, we'll help you. So they got the real deal, and you get someone who would this is what you do when you want to break in, and this is how you do it. And then actually it was so incredible because, in Paris, right, the rooftops, and they've got all those skylights. So how do you get in, from the skylight, and, cat burglars, incredible resource, right? You're training people to go there. And so I read that British actors, Shakespearean actors, of course, the theater is incredible in Britain, but many of them do ensemble pieces, right? If they go around the provinces or in the countryside, right? They have so many actors maybe doing a Shakespearean play. Well, they all take different roles, and they're back and forth on stage a lot, and they have to do quick costume changes, whatever, play an old man, a young man. And so there's tricks of the trade, an ensemble, a well-trained, right, actor would know. They'd know how to hunch themselves, how to put a pebble in the
shoe. I remember the way you did that, though. It was so good. And the other thing you always kept saying is think, and he also Stephanie told her, said, think and believe. And that really, she really did, it's gonna happen, and it did. And she just made herself into somebody else, and she was, drop the purse, pick up the sweater, do this, do that, dump something here, and she just, it was so well done. I really, really like that. We have another question. Would you consider using Kate for another World War II story? She's a great character.
Oh, she already is. Star of another book.
Really? Okay, well, you got to tell us what's going on.
Oh, I can't because my editor has it. I don't have any edits or comments yet, but it happens later in the war. Yeah, I don't even have a title, but I've written it.
Oh, all right. Well, which brings me to 20 arrondissements. You're on your 20th Aimée book. Oh, wow. So what's going on with you? What are you doing? What's next? Are you going to do more after the 20? And then you've got the Kate book. So where are you? Talk about that.
I just want to say that for the 20th anniversary, of Aimée LeDuc, my friend in Paris, who's a cocktailologist or whatever that's called.
Yeah, mixologist, yeah.
Yeah, mixologist. She made a champagne stiletto recipe for Aimée LeDuc. Anyway, I love this, but anyway.
Nice.
Yeah, so the next Aimée LeDuc is coming out March 2022. It's called Murder at Porte de Versailles,
Uh-huh.
set in the 15th arrondissement. And yeah, so Amy's back. I don't know. And I have to say that it will be the 20th Aimée LeDuc, but I made a mistake because I said 2 books in the 4th arrondissement. I forgot. So I have to write 21 books if I want to have a murder in every arrondissement.
You've got this great map on your website that somebody did for you that has the book in every place. That's very cool. You also have on your website, and I strongly urge everybody who's going to Paris when we can go back to take a look. But you've got the greatest like insider tour of places to go that don't even make the Lonely Planet guide, I'm sure. I mean, I think they're great. Which brings me also to how hard has it been not to travel for you? I mean, yeah.
Hard.
I was talking to Deb's Crowley and she's going nuts, you know, like she can't go to England. I mean, you get so much from traveling, you know, you get the sensory stuff, you get the details, you also get the, you know, kind of the excitement, you know, the free summer of excitement because you're there and at the certain season or whatever. Do you have any idea when you might go back? Or
as soon as I can get on a plane, I have both my shots. So you know, I have to say that, you know, it's being there also, you know, and my husband's really good. He doesn't want to go with me. He goes, I don't want to walk around the block 20 times and see where the gutter goes here. Forget it.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah. So how long do you go and do you ever take your family with you? And, you know, and you've told me for years you slept on people's couches. You still sleep on people's couches?
I do. Wherever I can. That makes it possible for me to go. What's really, you know, yesterday, Bertrand Tavernier, the famous French film director, died. He made incredible films all throughout the years. And I realized that I met him in Paris in the Marais when my son was he was 4 years old. And I wanted to give Bertrand Tavernier my book, Murder in the Marais, because he lived in the Marais. And I thought, well, you know, if he ever had an idea, and I knew a friend introduced me. So we met for a coffee, and there's my son, antsy and hungry and wanting to go to the playground. And Bertrand Tavernier was so sweet. He goes, I'm going to buy him some frites, you know?
Yeah. French fries,
and he did. And we got to talk. And so it was such a lovely giant of the cinema. Anyway, but mostly I do it without my family because, I mean, when my son was young, I would take him. And my friend had a daughter about his age. So things work out, you know? Yeah. But they don't want to go. I'm working.
Yeah, it's a long way. I mean, first of all, you got to cross the United States, then the Atlantic. I mean, it's already one thing from the East Coast, but it's a big trip. So how long do you stay?
Well, I don't have a dog. When I had a dog, it was shorter. So it'd be 3 weeks, a month, twice a year, something like that.
That's a long time. Yeah. And did you? So you go twice, but like to me, you know, you would go and then you'd come home and you go, oh, why didn't I ask? So did you go back and answer those questions? Is that how you do it?
Yeah, a lot of times. I mean, when I'm there, I don't write, but I meet people. And a lot of times, like, especially for the next book, which I wrote 2 years ago. I know it's odd to think of that way because of, a year and a half ago. I worked on that sort of when I was finishing up 3 Hours in Paris. So it's set in the 15th arrondissement. And I had an introduction to a woman who ran the biological police lab overlooking Parc Brasset. Now, she was on vacation when I was there. So I had the intro. I got to meet her 6 months later when I went back. So I had some ideas. So when I went back 6 months later and I'd started writing the story, she goes, I said, here's my idea. And we went out, she goes, you don't want to, no, we do this and we do that, but this could happen. And you could have a bomb explosion here.
Great. I love those people. Yeah. And you know what, I can't believe this, but I have more questions, but we are out of time almost. So tell me, yeah, I know it's 12:44. So tell me what's next for you then. Because now I'm confused. You got a book coming out next year. You finished another Kate book. So what are you doing now?
I'm writing another standalone that's different from everything else. So
is it set in Paris? Is it set in France?
It's always set in France. Yes, of course. It's always set in Paris.
Yes, why not? Why not? Oh, that's great.
The next Aimée LeDuc comes out March 2022, Murder at the Porte de Versailles.
Right. And then the other Kate book, do you know when that's coming out or where that's at?
It might come out in 2022 at the end. It depends on my editor. She's a busy
Okay.
gal, you know. She has a lot of other authors in her stable, but yeah.
Yeah, she does. Okay. Well, I think this is the part where I have to read what Jane told me to read, which is it's time for us to wrap things up. And thank you to Cara and to everyone who tuned in. Please consider buying 3 Hours in Paris from your local bookseller or through the links on vabook.org. You can also check out other Virginia Festival of the Book events at vabook.org. And Cara, merci mille fois. It was great to see you and talk to you. And I had a wonderful time. So I hope everybody else did as well. Okay.
I do too. Thank you, Ellen. It was really fun. And I'm so glad to come since I couldn't come last year.
I know. Well, at least we got to do it this year. You take care. Au revoir.
Au revoir. So, okay, leave.